If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by. It's finally here, Adeptus Custodes Deployment Guide Part 3. It has been a long time coming. Part 3 will finish off the deployment series for the Adeptus Custodes. We may do a deployment tips and tricks video, consolidate all of my ideas and mindset for Custodes deployment. Part 3 will be taking a look at how we deploy a tank or infantry heavy list on the Dawn of War or the Sweeping Engagement deployment. We will start with one of the originals, Dawn of War. Our first deployment in the video is Dawn of War. As far as I know, this deployment has been unchanged since the start of 10th edition. We deploy across the long board edge. This can be rather tricky as an elite Custodes army. We want to have a plan for turn 1 or even up to turn 2 when we deploy. We can find ourselves spread out too far apart to support each other in this long deployment. It is easy to get overwhelmed by enemy units in this deployment. The enemy can slam a lot of their army into us at the same time. Our first deployment is an All Infantry list on Dawn of War. No matter the deployment, if we have an All Infantry list, I do my best to deploy my entire army out of line of sight. No sense losing models turn 1 for nothing. The shooting lanes will be filled with enemy guns. Movement and unit placement will be even more important than it already is for an elite army. Let's take a look at the deployment, scope moves, and first turn movement if the Custodes went first or second. In these example deployments, I'm going to be using two different Adeptus Custodes lists. One will be a no Grav-tank list and mostly infantry. I'll have Trajan with some Wardens, a Blade Champion with some Wardens, along with some Alaris and some Virtus Praetors. For the Grav-tank list, I'm going to be actually running 3 units of Wardens, 2 of Blade Champions, 1 with Trajan, the 2 Custodes Grav-tanks with some chaff, and I do believe a Shield Captain with a Virtus Praetor. As for the Salamanders, I'm running a Firestorm Assault Force list. They do have a Land Raider Redeemer, and a Ballistic Dreadnought for vehicles in their list. For Part 3, we actually have some terrain footprints. As you can see here, I have most of my army, if not all my army, in line of sight cover. The bikes may be able to be shot if the Salamanders do decide to advance, but for the most part, my army should be safe from turn 1 shooting from the Salamanders. And for this battle, I do have a unit of 3 Alaris in Deep Strike. For the Salamanders deployment, you can see here that the Land Raiders are right on the line. They're not worried about any kind of incoming shooting, same as the Dreadnought on the right there, ready to move forward and get some shots off without any worry about shots coming back from the Custodes. I wanted to take a close look at the shooting lanes just so we can compare them when we do have the tanks list, because right now with the infantry, these Land Raiders are right in the shooting lanes. They're not worried about any kind of shooting coming back at them. They're ready to shoot at us if we move anywhere near them, especially that Land Raider Redeemer. It will be able to overwatch us if we get close. Once again, as you can see here, I try as much as possible to have most of my army, if not all of my army, behind some line of sight cover. With this Custodes list, I do have some Witch Seekers. These would be my scope moves if the Custodes got turn 1. 90% of the time, if I do have some Witch Seekers, I try to scope them towards the middle if I can. That way, if you get any of those secondary cards that you do need to interact with the middle, you do have a cheap unit ready to do that turn 1. This would be my movement for turn 1. Quite aggressive. I would want to advance pretty much everything up the board, try to get on these objectives as much as I can. Try to get on these objectives, get board control, also make sure I'm not exposing my army to a bunch of incoming fire. The center objective and a lot of these new terrain layouts seems to be quite open. For my Custodes, I try not to rush into the middle as soon as possible, unless it's with those Witch Seekers. I don't want to throw an expensive Wardens unit in the middle, or my bikes or anything like that. The Wardens are tough, but they're not going to survive 5 turns of shooting and melee. Usually I will go for the center later on in the game. For the right side of the board, I just shifted the Terminators over some more, waiting for the Salamanders to make their first move towards that objective. If I run up there turn 1 and grab that, I'm going to get shot off the board with all that firepower on the other side of the board. As you can see here, I loaded up the middle and one side of the board. I do have that Alaris threat on the right side of the board. As an elite army in these long deployments, we just don't have the units to cover the entire board. We also don't want to deploy everything on one side and just give that objective to the opponent. We want to have something there to threaten it. That way they don't just pile everything on our side of the board and counter what we're doing. If the Salamanders end up going first, I will use those scope moves with my Witch Seekers just to move everything back. That way I'm not losing those Witch Seekers for nothing. The Salamanders will either use their scouting moves if they have them to try to move block us or just gain some points. Turn 1 for the Salamanders, they're going to move their vehicles out quite aggressive since they don't have to worry about a lot of the shooting coming their way. they can move these vehicles out, get some good position, stage them, ready to do some overwatch or move on to objectives, or even have the units inside jump out and charge. This is how I deploy my infantry list against most armies in the game. If they're shooting, melee, or ranged, I try to have my units set up so I'm not losing anything turn 1. Next, we have a Dawn of War deployment with a Custodes list with 2 Grav-tanks. The deployment is quite similar. We still want to try to deploy everything out of line of sight. Yes, even the Grav-tanks. We want to use these as a counter-shooting backline unit for the first 2 or 3 turns. Let's take a look at how the deployment looks when we have some real guns of our own. As you can see here, the deployment is almost identical, except we do have these Grav-tanks sitting in our back lines behind some cover. We don't want to lose these turn 1. We don't need these sitting out in the shooting lanes. Hide these tanks, use them as a counter shooting unit. We don't want to use them as a bully unit unless the opponent is not running a lot of anti-tank of their own. We have a Wardens and Blade Champion unit on the left with some Witchseekers and a tank behind it. In the middle, we have a Shield Captain with the Virtus Praetors. Beside that, we have Trajan Valorous with some Wardens and some Prosecutors that are going to be standing on that home objective. On the right, I do have an Alaris Shield Captain with some Alaris backed up with a Grav-tank sitting behind them. Let's also take a look at the shooting lanes, because the shooting lanes will look much different. Let's also look at the Salamanders deployment, because that Salamanders deployment will look quite different. They don't want to take the chance of us getting turn 1, poking our tanks out and blowing their vehicles away, so their vehicles are going to be deployed a lot further back behind some cover because they don't want to lose them turn 1, just like we don't want to lose our vehicles turn 1. Now let's take a look at what it would look like if the Custodes went first. Our scope moves will be exactly the same as an infantry list. If we do only have 1 unit of Witchseekers, we want to scout them towards the middle. That way we're not using an expensive Custodes unit to do a secondary in the middle in case we do get one turn 1. First turn movement will also look quite similar. I'll advance a lot of my forward units up while keeping Trajan and the Wardens behind there ready to charge into the middle in the later turns. The tank on the left, I did move forward into that terrain. He will be visible now to that Salamander's vehicle, but that Salamander's vehicle is a Land Raider Redeemer. It will be able to shoot us with a Hunter-Killer missile, but it doesn't have any big las cannons to shoot at our tank, so that way it'll counter that Land Raider, because that Land Raider will need to come out. Unless they want to waste those points, that Land Raider will come out. Now we have our tank sitting there, ready to counter-shoot the Land Raider. If you wanted to, you could keep that tank behind there and move it out in future turns. This way they know I can shoot them next turn. I don't need to move anything. If they move that Land Raider out, even sitting there, I might be able to get some shots onto that Land Raider. If not, it's still sitting there, and the only shot the Land Raider has into my Caladius is the Hunter-Killer missile. This way, the Salamanders have that psychological threat. If they move that Land Raider out, I'm going to shoot it to pieces with my Caladius Grav-tank. The other Grav-tank is just going to sit there and screen. There's no reason to move that one out. There's no shooting lanes, and there is a regular Land Raider on the right there that can shoot it with some las cannons if I do move it out outside that line of sight terrain. For now, I'll just keep that Land Raider behind the Terminators as a counter-shooting threat. What about if the Salamanders had the first turn? The same for last time, we would scout our Witchseekers behind some line of sight terrain if we're able to, that way they're not blasted off the board the first turn. The Salamanders' first turn will be the same as last time, a bit less aggressive with their vehicles. They don't want to have them sitting in the shooting lanes since we do have some Caladius in this list. I will pretty much do the same movement I would do if I had got turn 1. I'll move my Caladius up to get in range to shoot the Redeemer. I'll advance everything up the board. I'm probably not going to try any turn 1 charges. I just want to get board position and get on objectives if I can. The same for that objective on the right. I'll let the Salamanders come forward. This way I can use one of those Blade Champion units to pressure the Salamanders expansion objective. I still want to wait until they get on that objective, get some more units a little bit closer. That way I can advance and charge them and hopefully steal that objective from them for at least a turn. Even with the threat of the Caladius Grav-tanks, I'm still not going to throw all of my units into the middle at the first of the game. I want to wait until the Salamanders move up a little bit, disperse some of their army across the board, then in those later turns, I'll move Trajan and his Wardens up and grab that center objective. That's how I would deploy these 2 Custodes list, either with a Grav-tank and infantry or full infantry on this Dawn of War deployment. Either against a balanced shooting or melee list, this is how I would deploy it. Against a melee heavy list, I may put up a few more screens, but for the most part, I don't want to be losing units turn 1. The second deployment for the video is sweeping engagement. The good thing is the new chapter approved missions have not changed their match play deployments. The deployment series should stay up to date. We need to make sure we do not get overwhelmed. It is hard to put pressure across an entire long board edge deployment with an elite faction with our low unit count. I do like this deployment more than the Dawn of War. The staggered deployment adds some extra tactics to the deployment. For sweeping engagement, I do have the same Custodes list. For the Salamanders, I went with a more melee-heavy list with lots of Terminators and a few Ballistus Dreadnoughts. We will start our sweeping engagement deployment guide with Adeptus Custodes Infantry list. We still want to deploy everything out of line of sight when possible. Getting to our expansion objective, the expansion objective being the easy objective to take in no man's land. And getting to that objective is much safer than Dawn of War, where in Dawn of War, it is much easier to pressure all of the no man's land objectives. Let's take a look at some example images of an All Infantry Custodes list with the sweeping engagement deployment. Sweeping engagement is quite similar to Dawn of War. They both use the long edge deployment. Sweeping engagement is more of a staggered deployment though. For my deployment, you can see it is similar to Dawn of War. I do have everything hiding out of line of sight except for my Witch Seekers. That way I can scout them towards the middle if I do get turn 1, or scout them back if I get turn 2. The Salamanders did infiltrate a unit of scouts onto that middle objective, so I won't be able to scout those Witch Seekers within 9 inches of those Space Marine scouts, and that's something you have to watch out from your opponents. They will use infiltrators to block your scout moves. I only put some Witch Seekers and some bikes in the middle. With the speed of those bikes, I can either go to the left side of the board, the right side of the board, or pressure the center if I need to. The sweeping engagement will be the same as any other deployment when we have an all infantry list, when we have no real anti-tank threat. The shooting lanes are going to be filled with enemy units. They'll be waiting for you to come out to shoot you to death, so there's no reason to deploy in those shooting lanes. Try to deploy out of line of sight as much as possible. As an elite army, that shouldn't be too hard. The Salamanders are deployed ready to run ahead with their units, put some of their own pressure on our units. They do have 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts in the list, ready to shoot down into those shooting lanes. For the sweeping engagement with an all infantry list, if I did get turn 1, since the Salamanders did have those infiltrating units there, I wouldn't be able to scout towards the center, but the Salamanders would want to scout their units away from mine if they could. They also don't want to lose units turn 1 if they can help it. For my movement, I would be quite aggressive with my units, move up behind some line of sight as much as I can. I want to get in good staging areas, grab my expansion objective if I can. That way next turn, I'm already starting to pile up some primary points. On the left side of the board, you can see Trajan with some Wardens. Even if the Salamanders did have something behind that terrain on that objective, I wouldn't charge through it. If I charged through that terrain, grab that objective, I would open that unit up to the entire shooting, entire fury of the Salamanders turn 1. I just want to stage and get ready. My melee hits much harder than the Salamanders. I should be able to kill most of the units I run into. I just don't want to lose units for nothing. So turn 1, you want to stage. You don't really want to charge or expose too much of your army. The Virtus Praetors would stay in my deployment. There's no real reason to move them out yet. They're more of a counter threat. They sit there and screen the back line. When the Salamanders do decide to commit to an area, I can push these bikes out and help take them out. I know I may seem like a broken record. Don't overcommit our army turn 1. We don't need to get out and try to wipe out the army turn 1. Get into staging areas, try to grab points, grab secondaries, prep for the next turn, and start planning for a big go turn in either turn 3 or turn 4. The Salamanders might be tricksy and use their scout moves and their scouts to actually move as much as possible to try to push our units into our own deployment. The bikes will be able to fly over them, but our Witch Seekers and our other units will not be able to move through that unit to get onto the objective. The Salamanders would want us to fly our bikes over, land on that objective so we can take it. They also have a big 10-man brick of Terminators waiting up there, so if I move my bikes on there, next turn they're going to get oath a moment and then charged by 10 Terminators. We don't want to do that. We will probably let them have that objective for now. They would 100% get charged by that big 10-man brick of Terminators and smashed into pieces. Now let's look how we would deploy on a sweeping engagement with a list using 2 Custodes Grav-tanks. The same as Dawn of War, we do not want to deploy these starting out in the shooting lanes. Deploy these in line of sight cover, then use them to counter shoot the enemy anti-tank guns. The point of these tanks is to keep the enemy guns off our Custodes infantry, not shoot the opponent's army off the board. They can when given the chance, but that's not what we take them for. Our deployment will be quite similar to an all infantry list, except we do have our Custodes Grav-tanks sitting behind some line of sight cover. The shooting lanes will look much different with these Custodes Grav-tanks. We won't have these dreadnoughts shooting in the shooting lanes, ready to pound us into the ground with a bunch of guns. They will want to keep them in some line of sight cover, that way we don't shoot them off the board turn 1. That's the biggest thing you will notice when you're running an infantry or a Custodes Grav-tank list, is the shooting lanes will look much different. The shooting lanes with an infantry list, they're going to be full of enemy guns, waiting to shoot us as soon as we step out. When we have Custodes Grav-tanks in the list, our opponent is much less likely to have their guns just sitting out in the shooting lanes. The biggest thing for the Adeptus Custodes I want to show with all of these images is use line of sight cover. Don't be shot by enemy guns unless you need to. Just because we have a 2-up save with a 4-up invulnerable doesn't mean we're going to tank an entire army. We need to be smart, we need to play smart, play with line of sight cover, don't lose your units for nothing. If the Custodes do get turn 1, the movement will look very similar to a Custodes infantry list. We're going to move our units up the board, stage for the later turns, grab our expansion objective if we can, use our Witch Seekers to do some secondary actions if we're able to. We are going to keep these Custodes Grav-tanks in our back line, so there's no reason to push these out. We don't want to get them shot for nothing. Keep them back here, screening and counter shooting. That's the same mindset if your opponent does get turn 1. Unless the opponent has brought some of the vehicles out to be shot by our Custodes Grav-tanks, we don't want to push these up. Keep these in our back lines as a counter shooting unit, as well as screening out enemy reserves. That's our final deployment for the deployment guide, part 3. The biggest thing I wanted to instill in this entire series is use line of sight cover. Just because we don't have any guns against a shooting list doesn't mean you're automatically going to lose. A lot of the times a shooting heavy list will not have the same amount of pressure and control of objectives. Against a shooting army, you just get on some objectives, get in some line of sight cover, and then use our units to push them back while we farm primary points. Who cares if you lose your entire army by turn 5 if you're winning 90 to 50? You're going to win the game even if you get tabled. You just want to get points, points, points. I've played a lot of 10th edition using just an infantry only list with maybe a few bikes, but mostly infantry because the Virtus Praetors really didn't get good until about 6 or 7 months ago. You do miss those Custodes Grav-tanks against some lists that really need some anti-tank. Against an opponent that doesn't really require these anti-tank shooting Custodes Grav-tanks, the All Infantry list dominates. You're able to put so much more pressure on the opponent when you don't have points put into these tanks. You have more Custodian Guard, more Wardens and Blade Champions, just more units to play with. This was the final part of the 3-part series for deployment. We can make a tips and tricks video for deployment down the road. If we do ever get some new match play deployments, I will make a part 4. Sorry it took so long to finish this series off. Next, I want to finish off the How to Build a List series for the Custodes, then we'll finally move on to the How to Beat series, where we'll go through all the different factions and how you can play against those factions with the Adeptus Custodes. Subscribe for weekly battle reports, list videos, and other Warhammer 40K content. Like always, thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by.